What's up folks, welcome to a new video. It's been a crazy year for politics in the UK in 2019. The will we won't we Brexit saga dominated headlines for much of the year, with a smattering of other topics getting a brief look in. Seeing as though it's the end of the year, I decided to compile my top 5 speeches in the House of Commons this year. First up, I've got Michael Gove just tearing apart Labour, the SNP and the Lib Dems in a single speech. It's such a shame that this bloke knifed Boris in the back in 2016 for the Tory leadership, because he's so bloody sharp. He could have been much more of an asset to the Leave movement over the last few years if he hadn't have done that.
And that takes me to the speech from the Shadow Secretary of State. He spoke well, but I felt he did not rise to the level of events. But one thing that was characteristic about his speech, he did not once mention in his speech the leader of the opposition or why he should be Prime Minister. Now, he doesn't want him to be Prime Minister. I have a lot of time for the Honourable Member. We have several things in common. He's lost weight recently. Sorry, we've both lost weight recently, I should say. Him much more so. We're both friends of Israel. Him much more so. And we both recognise that the member for Islington North is about the worst possible person to lead the Labour Party. Him much more so. Now, as well as great speeches from the backbenches, we also had some interesting speeches from the front benches. We had a speech of over 20 minutes from my great friend, the leader of the Scottish National Party in this place. But again, in those 20 minutes, he did not once mention the common fisheries policy. I think everyone in Scotland who recognises the potential to free ourselves from the common fisheries policy which Brexit provides will note that in 20 minutes of precious parliamentary time, the SNP didn't mention them, aren't interested in them, and as far as the fishing people of Scotland are concerned, the SNP have literally nothing to say. I turn to the speech from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, someone whom I also have affection and respect for, and he made a number of good points. But he also said that he regretted the referendum. This is from the party that was the first in this House to say that we should have a referendum on EU membership. And because he doesn't like the result of the last referendum, he now wants another referendum. The Liberal Democrat policy on referendums is not the policy of Gladstone or Lloyd George, it's the policy of Vicky Pollard. No, but yeah, but no, but yeah.
Next up, Mark Francois asks a very poignant question to the then Prime Minister Theresa May about a veteran who served in the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
Here's Royal Marine David Griffin, a Dublin-born Irish Catholic who joined the British Army, transferred to the Royal Marines. In 1972 in Belfast, he killed an IRA gunman who was about to assassinate one of his comrades at a guard post. 47 years later, he is now being investigated by the PSNI. He is watching these proceedings now, Prime Minister, from his home at the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. He asked me to ask you this. I served my Queen and country in uniform for over 20 years, and I was commended for my service in Northern Ireland. Acting under the lawful orders of my officer commanding, I killed a terrorist who was about to murder one of my comrades, and yet I'm being investigated as if I were a criminal. The IRA have letters of comfort. We don't. Why, Prime Minister, are you pandering to Sinn Féin IRA while throwing veterans like me to the wolves?
The top 3 were really difficult to separate for me, but next up I've got this absolutely brilliant speech by Steve Baker on the principles of democracy and the rights of the electorate, which he made at a very strange time in this country, when a lot of ultra-Remainers were using the courts on a semi-regular basis to get involved in the Brexit process.
Thank you
very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very pleased earlier today that the Labour member for Birmingham Yardley acknowledged that there is a common sense of good motive amongst members of Parliament from all sides of the House. I confess that has not always been reflected in the tone of many of the debates which I've attended, which has been a cause of some sorrow to me, because I believe that in this debate on the principles of democracy and the rights of the electorate, there is a huge amount of common ground. Of course, we got elected to Parliament to uphold those very rights. I think most of us have a common dream, a dream of a society that is ever more prosperous and free, virtuous, or if not virtuous, at least seeking to become more virtuous, happy, people pursuing their goals and flourishing to the fullest extent, not trapped in poverty. And to the front bench spokesman, I'm talking about the inhumanity of bureaucracy under this government. I have to say to her, please read the reports of the Centre for Social Justice at the time leading up to the 2010 election, because the state is never an instrument of kindness and compassion under any government. It's always rule-bound, it's always inhumane. And one of the things we all must do, which is not the topic of this debate, is to work out how to enable all of the wonderful public servants in all of our public services to be freer to express the compassion which they personally feel for other human beings. And members will find on the record a speech I made some time ago in relation to PIP on just this subject. Now, I believe that democracy is the foundation of that dream. And the foundation of that dream is something which I feel very deeply, and that is the moral, legal and political equality of every person. Every single person, irrespective of their actual merits, should be treated by our systems as morally, legally and politically equal. That's why it's so important. Somebody mentioned boundary changes earlier. My constituency happens to represent about the right number of people, but some are way too large and some are way too small, and that does not reflect political equality. Now, democracy ought not to be idolised. Goodness knows, in the midst of this political crisis, things have gone wrong, and I refer to the economic crisis many times. I have done many times to say that we are, I believe, in a profound crisis of political economy that goes way beyond the topic of any one particular debate. The fundamental issue at stake, though, is this, that we need to be able to restrain the coercive power of the state peacefully at the ballot box. I'll slightly paraphrase Karl Popper, a very important philosopher. He started off on the left. He was, I believe, a Marxist who fled from Marxism when one of his friends was killed in a riot, and people organising it had no sympathy, said that you had to break some eggs to make an omelette. And he started thinking about whether communism was in fact scientific. But he said this, and I do slightly paraphrase to reflect the spirit of the day: you can choose whatever name you like for the two types of government. I personally call the type of government which can be removed peacefully at the ballot box democracy, and the other tyranny. And that is the fundamental point. The public must be able to withdraw their consent from a system of government and have it removed and replaced with a system which they prefer. That's why we need a general election today, because clearly this House has withdrawn its consent from today's government. The government should therefore fall, and we should have a general election. It is unconstitutional. He grumbles from sedentary position. I can't hear him, but I'll take his intervention.
The point is surely that what you get with a general election is a change of government. He's talking about a system of government, which is a quite different thing.
I'm talking about both. I'm talking about the principle of democracy, which is the stability which comes from both a government and a system enjoying democratic legitimacy expressed through the ballot box. Because the second point I want to make is the point about the European Union. I am here today, though I care about many things, because of the way the European Union constitution was handled. It was put to referenda in Lithuania, Hungary, Slovenia, Italy, Spain, Austria, Greece, Malta, Cyprus, Latvia, Luxembourg, Belgium, Estonia, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Germany and Finland, all of whom said yes. I had read the constitution. I knew that when the referendum came I should vote against it because it was too bureaucratic and therefore I thought likely to be inhumane. But when it went to France and the Netherlands, of course, they said no, and so referenda were cancelled in the Czech Republic, Denmark, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, Sweden, and yes, the United Kingdom. But what did they do, Madam Deputy Speaker? The European Union and those who govern it didn't change course and say, it turns out we can't get this system through the democratic consent of the peoples of Europe, so we must take another course. That's not what they did. As anyone who read Open Europe's side-by-side comparison of the Lisbon Treaty, which replaced the European Constitution next to that Constitution, anyone who read that document will know they're functionally equivalent. And what they did was an absolute democratic outrage. They changed the Constitution of France to avoid a referendum, and they made Ireland vote twice. And that is why I'm in politics. The fundamental issue at stake today, Madam Deputy Speaker... I will, just before I finish.
I get the impression that he's on his peroration. I can't resist an historic footnote to the Lisbon Treaty, and that is that when a number of us argued that we ought to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty in the United Kingdom, one party said that we shouldn't have a referendum on this, we should have an in-out referendum on our membership of the European Union, and that party was the Liberal Democrats. Where are they on that position today?
Well, of course, as he knows, they're now committed to always ignoring a Leave result, and that too is an outrage, but at least they're clear about it, and I feel confident we could rely on them to abide by it. The fundamental point is this, Madam Deputy Speaker: the people must get the government they vote for, and they must not get the government that they didn't vote for, that they can't get rid of. This is a fundamental point related to the dreams we all have of a better society. It's about the dignity of the individual and the right of every person to determine their future peacefully at the ballot box.
Yeah. This next one is one of my favourite speeches of all times in the House of Commons, because it just came out of nowhere. The House was supposed to be discussing Brexit, but then Ian Austin decides not to talk about Brexit, and he goes fully nuclear about Jeremy Corbyn and the party's problems with anti-Semitism.
I have to say right at the outset that I think it's absolutely incredible to hear the Leader of the Opposition lecturing anybody else about observing the rule of law. And, Mr. Speaker, they've already started moaning, but they ought to listen. They ought to listen. They ought to listen. They're going to have to get used to it, because the points I'm going to raise, in this debate are the questions they're going to have to answer in an election campaign, and they're going to have to explain to their voters and their constituents and the people of this country why they think someone with an appalling record like the Leader of the Opposition is fit, not just, well, the Honourable Lady behind me asked why I don't go and sit somewhere else. I'm sitting here, I'm standing here, well, I'll explain why. I'll explain why. I'm standing here because I was elected, because I think...
Order and main.
We are having incredible difficulty hearing the honourable gentleman, who is making a very powerful speak because he's being barracked.
Oh dear. Well, I don't wish to be unkind to the honourable lady, but she's not entirely averse to making loud noises from a sedentary position. So, although I appreciate her important contribution on this, I think I'll make the judgment myself if she doesn't mind. I'm deeply obliged to her. Ian Austin.
Speaker, the more they interrupt, the longer it'll take. But I'm going to make the points. And the reason I haven't moved is because I didn't leave the Labour Party to join another party. I left the Labour Party to shine a spotlight on the disgrace it's become under his leadership, and because I regard myself as proper, decent, traditional Labour, not like the extremists who've taken over this party and are dragging it into the mud. And that's the point I'm going to make in this debate. And I want to say this. These are people, the Leader of the Opposition, the Shadow Chancellor, these are people who've spent their entire time in politics, working with, defending all sorts of extremists, and in some cases, terrorists and anti-Semites. Remember what these people said about the IRA. It might be ancient history to the Labour Party's new young recruits, but many people will never forget how they supported terrorists responsible for horrific carnage in a brutal civil war that saw people blown up in pubs, hotels and shopping centres. A few weeks after the IRA blew up a hotel in Brighton, murdered 5 people at the Tory party conference, the Leader of the Opposition invited 2 suspected IRA terrorists to Parliament. When the man responsible for planting that bomb was put on trial, he protested outside the court. The Shadow Chancellor said that, quote, those people involved in the arms struggle, people he said had used, quote, bombs and bullets, should be honoured. And they have the brass neck to lecture anybody about the rule of law. What a disgrace. Let me tell you this.
Point of order, Graham Davis.
Stan, this debate is about obeying the rule of law, whether the Prime Minister obeys the rule of law, not whether members talk to people who allegedly have broken the law. It's about whether we deliver the rule of law.
Full to the honourable gentleman. His antennae are keenly attuned to the debate. There is a fine dividing line. The honourable gentleman is dilating on the broad theme of disregard bordering upon contempt for the law. If I think he has elided into a wholly different subject, then I will always profit by the honourable gentleman's counsels. But for now, he's all right. Just. But I do warn the honourable gentleman that I hope his speech tonight, given that many other people wish to contribute, is not going to be as long as the speeches he used to deliver at the Students' Union at the University of Essex 36 years ago, when we jousted together. It needs to be shorter. Mr. Ian Austin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my speeches then were a lot shorter than yours.
Well, that may be, but what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that by common consent, mine were considerably better. Mr. Ian Austin.
Well, I'm not going to argue that point, Mr. Speaker. But look, this is a debate about whether politicians can be trusted to obey the rule of law. And there's not a single Labour figure in the past, not a single one, who would have backed violent street protest, as the Shadow Chancellor did, when he called for, quote, insurrection to bring down the government, or praised rioters who he said had kicked the SHIT out of the Conservative Party's offices, or talked, well, she might not want to hear it, but I tell you this. I'm not going there. Well, I've explained why I'm not going over there. But I tell you this. I'm here because because voters in Dudley North sent me here to represent them.
As a Labour representative.
And my views and the things I stand up for, decency in politics, the rule of law, none of these things have changed, and everybody in Dudley knew exactly what I thought of these people at the last election. And I'll tell you this, and I'll tell the honourable lady this, I'm going to make absolutely certain that she's going to have to answer to her voters for these points at the next election. All right? Well, we'll see. Now,
you have to answer to yours.
Yeah, don't worry about that. And no other senior figure in the Labour Party's history, would have joked about lynching a female member of Parliament. They don't believe in the rule of law abroad either, Mr. Speaker. They always back the wrong side, whether it's the IRA or Hamas and Hezbollah, who they describe as friends. No previous Labour leader would have supported brutal totalitarian dictatorships like the ones in Cuba or Venezuela that have absolutely no regard whatsoever for the rule of law, and no previous Labour leadership would have allowed a party with a proud history of fighting racial prejudice to have been poisoned by racism, which is what's happened under these people. Racism against Jewish people, to the extent that members have been arrested on suspicion of racial hatred, that the party itself has become the first in history to be investigated under equalities laws by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. These people and the people around them are a million miles away from the traditional, mainstream, decent politics of the Labour Party. They have poisoned what was once a great party with extremism. They cannot be trusted with the institutions that underpin our democracy. They are completely unfit to lead the Labour Party, let alone our country.
Last but by no means least is this absolute blooded cracker on the state of the last Parliament that we had before the general election from the People's baritone, Sir Geoffrey Cox.
Right honourable and learned friend agree that Rather than being some newfangled, innovative decision, this was a profoundly conservative decision by the Supreme Court asserting the ancient sovereignty of Parliament. And that fundamentally, the principle at stake here is that, of course, neither that court nor any other court should determine whether Brexit takes place. That decision has been made by the people. But it is for this House, the only directly elected representatives of the people, to determine the form in which that Brexit happens.
Let me say to my right honourable friend, the Supreme Court invoked the principle of parliamentary sovereignty and the principle, the Convention of Parliamentary Accountability, ministerial accountability to Parliament, as a justification for making justiciable the decision to prorogue. And that's what it was entitled to do, and it effectively amounts to converting a political convention into a legal rule. That traditionally was not thought to be possible. The Supreme Court has decided that it is, and I certainly do not in any way complain with its right to do so. But what I would say to my right honourable friend is, I would agree with him that Parliament has to determine the terms on which we leave. But this Parliament has declined 3 times to pass a withdrawal act with which the opposition, in relation to the withdrawal act, had absolutely no objection. And it was then we now have a wide number of this House setting its face against leaving at all. And when this government draws the only logical inference from that position, which is that it must leave, therefore, without any deal at all, it still sets its face, denying the electorate the chance of having its say in how this matter should be resolved. This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches, and whatever
the House must come to order. We've got a lot of business to transact. There is a further urgent question. There are no fewer, I say, for the benefit of those observing, 5 ministerial statements. The attorney must be heard, and so, I hope, will lots of other people. The attorney.
They don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace. Given the opportunity, since I am asked, let me tell them the truth. They could vote no confidence at any time, but they're too cowardly. They could agree to a motion to allow this House to dissolve, but they're too cowardly to give it a go. This Parliament should have the courage to face the electorate. But it won't. It won't, because so many of them are really all about preventing us leaving the European Union at all. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.